Hello, I'm Melissa Mueller, software engineer at Mitsubishi Electric Train, and I ran into a quirk a few days ago that tripped up my coding for about 48 hours. Couldn't figure it out, and I thought I would tell you all about it if you didn't know too. So, let's talk about sets, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that may be. Let's talk about sets. Okay, that was embarrassing, but I love that song.
You did great, Melissa.
You did. That's exactly how I took the title of this presentation. That's exactly the song I thought about too. So.
Well, I put the link in the invite. So.
Oh, did you? Oh, okay.
Yeah. All right. So these are the links to. Oh, I didn't realize I hate when I don't have things consistent. I apologize for one link being bolded and another not being bolded, but every community group has two different pages. The Salesforce chatter page, let me bring this up. So the link on the left is for our actual chatter page. And the link on the right over here, the Atlanta Dev Group, is where you'll find, and obviously did, find the invitations about to our events. And that page looks like this. So you want to make sure that you're signed up at both pages because they're completely separate logins. And I always try and cross post. So if I post an event on the dev group Bevy page, I also try and post it on the chatter page. You never know what's going on in my brain. I might actually confuse that at some point. But there's some Twitter accounts. This is our official Atlanta Salesforce group page on Twitter, and this is Salesforce Devs group. So there are some resources for you. Now, one of the things that you get told all the time about sets, and it's a good thing, at least you think it is until you run into a problem where it doesn't work right, but it shouldn't contain any duplicates. And it's also ordered, so you can rely on the elements always being in order. But one thing, if you notice, they don't tell you anything that you actually can get duplicate records. I couldn't even believe it. I thought I was eliminating my duplicates by putting them into a set, but it turns out that that doesn't work the same for records. If you look at a different reference guide, you'll get this information. They actually compare by hash code. So the record, whether it's just an ID or a full record, like an account record with an account ID, but also with fields, if the fields don't match exactly and the ID doesn't match exactly, you're going to get a duplicate in that set. It kind of went against everything I knew for the last 5 years about developing with Salesforce. I couldn't even believe it. I I I, I don't even know how. Like I was so lost. I must have deployed this stuff to a testing environment 7 or 8 times, and I kept getting the same problem. I just couldn't figure it out. So let's do a little bit of demoing here. Da, 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 da. So where is that? Dev console. Okay, can y'all see my dev console?
Yep.
Okay. Excellent.
Yep.
So one of the things you want to do with a trigger is have as little logic in it as possible. But one of the things I consistently do in my company's org is make sure a trigger can be turned off. And I use custom metadata for that. And when we use custom metadata, let me find that one. Oh, I show my taskbar. That's that. There we go. And no, I don't want to see you. Okay. So my custom metadata is a custom metadata type with a record that has two fields, run maps and run sets. So the first thing I did after I wrote all this code was run the sets. If you'll see here, I'm calling one class, but two different methods depending on what I'm doing. The first method, run sets, it gets the related accounts. So a little background, sorry. This is a Trailhead Playground, and I have set up the leads object to have an account, a lookup to an account, because I want to know what account I'm assigning a lead to. And then I also want to know how many hot leads, warm leads, cold leads the account is getting. So I have set up fields on the account for number of cold leads, number of hot leads, number of warm leads. And on the lead object, oh, nope, I didn't actually, this is where I started with that. On the account, there's number of cold lead objects, and on the lead, there is an account lookup. That'll help make a little bit more sense of this code that I'm about to show you. First, we get the accounts, all the accounts that are related to the leads. Put the leads, the account IDs into a set and query for those accounts. Then we process the number of leads. So we look at the lead map and we query to get the account that relates to that lead. And then we check to see what the rating is and add a point. Now, in theory, what I wound up running into, my logic is a lot more complex and has to go up and down. The values have to be removed sometimes. I tried to be as simple as possible with just making these go up. Theoretically, a lead could be declined and it would need to be a -1 as opposed to a +1. But here we see for every lead that you get, it checks the number or it checks the rating and adds to that field on the account. So here we're inside that loop and we're adding the account to a set. Now this line 27 isn't necessary, but for demonstration purposes, I put it in for you so you'd be able to see when you add just the ID to the set, it actually works just fine and you don't get any duplicates. And here's some other debugs that I'll show you in a moment. And because it's a set and you can't perform a DML operation on a set, you have to put that set into a list and then update the list. So what happens when you do that? You get this output here. First, we see that, yes, I'm running sets, and then we see it loop through all of these. And the reason I put this debug in here was so that you could see my test progressively adding values to each one of those fields. But notice that this is the same account ID, but different values on the fields. So every time it adds it to the set, it adds it as a new record. We get down here, I've added the IDs so we can see that there are only 2 IDs in the account ID set member. But when we look at the whole record size of the set, there's 6 records, and 3 3 of them have one ID and 3 of them have another ID. Well, that doesn't work with a set. When you do that with a set, you get this error here. Down a ways, I know it's here, I've seen it. Come on, scroll. All right. Duplicate ID in list. And it doesn't really necessarily lend to what's causing your problem. If you never saw the other set of documentation, you would truly believe that a set can never have duplicate records. Well, technically, this isn't a duplicate record because each one of them has its own hashtag. If you know anything about downloading music or downloading random programs, they give you I believe it's an MD5, something like that, a hash, so that you can check to make sure the hash that is on their website, AKA the real specific, every single character is exactly the same as what you just downloaded. So you can be sure that nothing has intercepted. Well, these hashes on these records here aren't the same because every single character in the record isn't the same. So when you go back to the other class that I wrote to show you this as an example, I should move that from that view. You can see the change in the accounts. On the left here is the set class that I wrote, and on the right here is the map class. There are very few changes. Basically, instead of adding the record to a set, you can add it to a map and it doesn't duplicate because a map can only have one unique key. So as long as you're pulling the account out of that map every single time you run it, you're getting that same map and you're getting that same record and updating the record that was there that already existed. So let's look at this. Run up, no, wait, I need to change my custom metadata to run maps and not run sets. And then we can run the test, which thankfully runs really quickly because it's a Trailhead playground. And we get success this time. And you'll notice that the logs look different because this time you can see it updates the same record over and over again, and then only inserts 2 records by using the values of the record, the map, the values of the map. So it's a really easy fix, but if you don't know that this is how sets work, you can lose your mind trying to figure out, well, there's not supposed to be duplicates. Why are there duplicates? This is the only time in 5.5 years I've ever run into this. So I don't imagine that a lot of people see this very often. And that's why I wanted to put the information out there. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? I guess I should find the chat and look and see if there are any questions. There we go. Chat. Outstanding. Well, thank you, Eric. I appreciate that, especially since your presentation at Southeast Streaming was absolutely outstanding too.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Did you do any work with the equals method or overriding that to do your own comparison between objects?
No, I did not. I didn't even think about it. I was just trying to solve my problem.
Yeah.
Somebody else had written the loop and apparently didn't know the issue either. They had initially had it as lists, and then I changed it to sets, and I still had the same problem. And that's when I dug deep and found out that maps can solve the problem. How would an equals method solve this?
I haven't done it in Apex. I've done it in other languages, but the idea of an equals method is to specify logic to declaratively determine whether two objects are the same. So when you have a complex structure like an S object, right, you can write an equals method that literally says, if you compare this to another object of the same type and whatever logic you write is true, then these two things are equal, right? Without doing that, it's relying on hash codes, which I think you found out, right? Which doesn't work as well in sets as it does in maps.
Yeah.
So again, I haven't done it in Apex. I've done it in Java and some other languages, but that ability to write a dot equals method allows you to kind of define your own logic for determining if two things are duplicates or not, right?
Cool.
Yeah.
I have written C# before, so it's been well, gosh, now we're at 10 years since I've written C#, but I do deal with other people in my company who write C# on a regular basis, and that does sound like an interesting way to solve that problem. And I wouldn't be surprised if I went back and talked to my API team, and that's how I refer to them. They're not really the API team, but they write most of the C# APIs that we've used for many years. I bet they already do that. So,
well, and I like your solution better because it means I don't have to write custom equals methods for each of my S objects, right? If I can use maps and just get the right result without having to write that extra code, I'd always choose that. So I think this is a great solution.
Thank you. Okay, let's see.
I actually like the way that you showed what was wrong. It's a simple
thank you, Michael.
debug. It's a simple debug statement, but as you said, sometimes these things drive you nuts.
Oh yeah.
I had one the other day where I was pulling this, and it would pull the IDs, but it kept overwriting them. And so I was supposed to have a dozen records, and I kept having one or something the way it was. And so I had to just put a little debug in there, and oh, okay, ding. But it's the proof of, okay, I'm not going crazy. This is right.
Yeah. So your point on debug statements, one of the things that it was about a year into, so I've been developing on the Salesforce platform for 5.5 years, and I've tried to meet and get as much knowledge from anybody I can, and over those times, and I still do always be learning, But one of the things I found out was that debug statements do take up processing time.
Yeah.
And a lot of devs tend to remove debug statements. Sometimes I'll remove them when I've got a lot of them, like a ridiculous amount, because that does happen. But oftentimes I comment most of them out and maybe all of them out. But the ones that I leave in, even though they're commented out, I leave them there because if the class has to be, if something's wrong and somebody has to go back and figure out what's wrong, pushing it to a sandbox and uncommenting debug logs or debug statements that are already existent in the class is a lot easier than going back and trying to add debug statements. Basically, if you leave them there and just comment them out, the next dev who works on it can look at this and go, oh, I bet there might have been a question here and this is the problem I'm having. So let me uncomment that and run this. And they don't have to spend the extra work. I know a lot of people think it looks messy. I'm not afraid to show that I'm not a perfect developer. I don't think if anyone ever tells you they're a perfect developer, they do no wrong. Oh no, I don't need debug statements.
Then
Laugh
they've
at them
never
and walk
written a
away.
line of code. They've never written a line of code.
Right. Laugh at them and walk away. Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't need their thoughts messing up your brain.
Yeah. I agree with that. Yes, you do need to take them out before going to production. You know, sometimes if you're just testing one thing, you can take them out afterwards. But, you know, that goes back to commenting too. It makes absolute sense to you what you did, but somebody who's looking at it 2 years later doesn't know what this applied to and why and what you were trying to achieve with it and different things. And so I'm constantly on my folks to add more documentation. Make sure that there's always a header to every method. Date when it was done, date when it was updated. If you're using Agile or some other type of story or requirements gathering, put the requirement in there, a reference to the number so you know what's going on. If you got different divisions, say which division it worked in. Because, you know, you get people, it just, you change the developers, you change contractors, you change all these folks over time. And now somebody's trying to put it back together and there's nobody to answer the questions. So along with leaving the debugs in, make sure you comment. It's crazy how much code I see where there is not a line of comment.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. What you're seeing here is me rushing to get this this out so that it was available. You would definitely see comments in my production org, and I get upset when people don't put them in.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, while we're talking about that,
I opened up a class at a new customer, 7,500 lines
wow,
In a
yeah,
single class.
in a class.
Oh,
There was
wow.
about 40 methods,
that, go ahead.
five comments. Five.
That's all? Only
Yes.
5 comments? That's a lot of lines for only 5 comments.
Yeah, I let the customer know that I said, you know, we estimated, you know, based on a couple of things, and this throws every one of those estimates out the window. Because I have no clue what's going on here and no way to do it except go line by line by line.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds scary. So you work for consultancy?
I work for a company called ServiceMax.
Okay.
And we implement our own product. ServiceMax is for field service, but we're built, you know, most of ours is built on top of the Salesforce platform. We also have Asset 360, which works hand in hand with Salesforce Field Service.
That's cool.
And so they're actually, you know, they've invested in our company a couple of times now with different things. And so we do that. So I do a lot of implementation. And hey, you got to write some custom code sometimes to get things done. This one customer was a client of ours for 5 or 6 years, and they've had 6 or 8 different developers in doing custom stuff, and not a one of them left comments.
So before I came to Mitsubishi, there was a lot of customization around CPQ, which they got that before it was CPQ. It was actually Steel Brick.
Steel Brick, yeah.
Quick quote, yeah.
Yeah.
And they also heavily customized out Service Cloud, which was going through its initial deployment and UAT when I started. And over the years I've worked there, I've developed guidelines for our consultant teams. And you'll notice here, it maybe should be at the top, but in my guidelines, I tell them that they're expected to write notes on what they've changed.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I might have some naming conventions and stuff that I put out to the people that we work with. But getting somebody to follow that is completely different than just telling them. I try not to micromanage, but for some reason, it seems like if I don't, I wind up with problems. Like a permission set that they told me was read-only access today. And when we assigned it to the guest user, hey, guess what? There was edit access in there.
Yeah.
You know, when I've got such a big org, we have 560 internal users and about 60,000 external users across 5 different experiences. And when you have such a big org, you're doing deployments that aren't like, well, sometimes they're 4 and 5 components, but a lot of times there are 300 plus components. And as much as a code review is helpful, you can't always catch everything. And sometimes you wind up finding a problem and you go in there and you alter a class and there's no code review because it's a small change, but whoever did that change, even though they've been given your developer guidelines, just makes the quick change in order to get it fixed. And
Yeah.
that can be very detrimental.
Yeah. I agree.
Sounds like doing
Okay.
impact analysis in your org is really could be a lot, even if it's a very small change.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's hard to enforce that, or hard to really get people to buy into it.
Yeah.
Because it does take time to make these comments.
Yeah, with deadlines and all. Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. I'm under those all the time.
Right.
But the return on it is huge. It's huge.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So let's see. I'm looking through the comments here. Satija, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I'm sorry if I'm not. But you said, I'm kind of familiar with this with other language. In most languages, as far as I know, non-primitive data is stored in a separate place, and the variable only stores the reference. Like a pointer in C++, I assume is what you're talking about. I'm not sure. Like I said, I haven't developed outside of Salesforce in quite a while. Maybe Eric, did you have any comments or anyone else about that? It's okay if you don't.
Non-primitive.
Trying to get back to the window. Yes, when you have a structured or a complex object, it doesn't just store a flat value; it stores a reference, an address to the value. So yes, that can be a very different way to look at equality.
So I don't even know. Apex works like Java, and Java doesn't get the same kind of point. Oh, I mean, it gets null pointer exceptions, but it's not the same type of memory pointer that C++ has when I learned it in school.
Right.
So I don't know that you would run into that exact same problem with Apex, but it's an interesting call out. Thank you. Alex, thanks for the link for Jude. I just combined your first name and your last name. Raj, following the article so I can check it out soon. Yeah, I'm going to look at it too, and we'll get together and talk about a possible session on that.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Hope they were good ones. Not sure what you're referring to, Eric, but I hope whatever I was referring to were good ones
The
too.
comments, I remember. I think there was a class that only had like 5 comments, but a couple thousand lines.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they better have been extremely exceptional comments for only having 5 in thousands of lines. Okay, so
That
detail-
particular org had all sorts of problems.
yeah, I've heard about so many messes that people walk into. One of my messes is actually in the Elements Cloud. You don't want to be this org book. Let's see. So Judah says, I'm still a newbie, but I've come across many trigger handler classes that are like 3,000 lines and have no comments. Okay, so you're not alone, Alex.
Mhm.
Or, yeah, I think that it was either Alex or Michael who were saying that. Alex, I've seen Apex class for visual force controllers that are over 2,000 lines. Wow. Talk about lack of separation of duties.
Well,
The controllers are tricky sometimes because
Yeah.
they put it in the top of the Visual Force page, and then before you know it, once you do all your getters and setters, but you probably should separate the business logic and the calls to the database and everything. But it seems like sometimes those controllers just get stacked with everything that one Visual Force page needs.
Yeah. Yep.
yeah,
Yes,
it's
they
not
do.
just the Visual Force pages and other things, but there's a lot of stuff in there. But it's go back to the old days when everything was actually in the trigger itself.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I remember that. It was scary. But it, there are some reasons why you would have it there. Sometimes you need the controller, sometimes you need this, you separate it out. But trying to get somebody to set up 4 or 5 classes when they first start developing to handle all these things is, going to be tough unless they're used to developing in very large orgs where you've got that separation. And what
Yeah.
happens is they create a class and it's got one method. Next thing you know, it's got 4 or 5. Then it's got 10. And they don't have the time to go back and separate all of those out again. So yeah, it becomes a bit of an issue.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. And it's really easy to fall into that. Especially now, I don't know if y'all know this. I learned this from Kevin Poorman, who has stepped out of the Salesforce ecosystem, but you'll see him on Stack Exchange and on Twitter and other places as Code Fryer. That's his handle. And Kevin was helping me create community users because they're a bit tricky and they don't work the same way as creating other users. And I opened up a dev console and I had like 90 million tabs up, and he went, "Oh my gosh, what are you doing? How come you have so many tabs open?" Which you would need another tab for every single one of those classes and the test classes that go along with it, if that's what you're going to open. Every single one of these instances of a tab is another instance of the dev console. You just don't know it. They're all running in the background. So when your dev console locks up, it's most likely going to happen because you've got multiple tabs open. Now, I use Visual Studio Code for development when I'm actually working on a full project. But when I have to look at something quick, my go-to is the dev console. And I have had my dev console lock up on me because of too many tabs.
That is something I didn't know.
Yeah. Get friendly with the developers. You'll learn a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I just didn't know it was a separate instance and to close it down. I used to close them down just because I get confused if I'm not careful or might open the wrong one again.
Yeah, no,
But
totally. Especially if you have similar names like lead trigger,
yeah,
lead trigger handler.
you can't see the full name of it, and got to go up to the top again to know exactly which one you're looking at.
Yeah.
But on that same thing, does anybody here use a test factory? Is what we call it. So
Yeah, I do.
okay, good.
We have several.
Okay, no, that's fine. And it sounds like we've got a couple of new folks still on this call, and we're talking about that. It's one of those where instead of writing a test class for, you've got that test class, but instead of creating the data at the top of it, you have another class that is your test factory, and you call that to get your account data, your contact data, and your whatever. Because that way, if somebody goes in, especially in production, and creates a new validation rule, and all of a sudden all of your test classes fail because you've got to have a new field in there, you go, oh, okay, great. You go to your test factory and edit the 3 records that create accounts, and you're done. You don't have to hunt through every class to look for where did I create an account.
You're
If it-
absolutely correct.
Mhm.
However, let me show you what happens when you're at a very large org. So before I show you this, keep in mind that we have Financial Force, we have CPQ, we have Tavant, which is a warranty system, we have Opinium, which is a learning system. And over the past years, last year, I've been dealing with 5 different consulting companies. This has been in my developer notes for quite a while now. This is what happens when you have that many different teams and that many different things. You get 13 test utility accounts, or classes rather. So do yourself a favor. Once you've created one of those, tell your consultants and your teammates to use the one class.
Yes, that is true. It is. It's tough.
Yeah, it can be. You can tell somebody something, but getting them to listen and do what you're asking them to do is not necessarily the easiest thing in the world. And I am no one's mother, and I'm definitely not the manager. So all I can do is say, you were told to do this, Don, who is my manager. Don, tell them they're wrong. Actually, I actually am way too outspoken. I tell them they're wrong. But I often get told that my honesty is refreshing, and the fact that I speak up is helpful, because at least we're eliminating problems before they get to production. Because once a problem gets to production, it takes 80 times more effort to fix it in production than it takes to fix it while you're testing and developing. And that's just a known fact in the software industry. So
well, once it gets to production, it almost never gets out.
yeah, unless it's a real problem. Yeah, gotta figure it out.
Yeah, there's never, you add that quick code, like, I'll go back and clean that up later, and later never comes.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
What we like about the test factory, as well as the centralization, is it lets the tests be about the tests. When you're in a field service lightning implementation or something very complex, you can spend, 50, 60 lines of code setting up all the data, and what you're testing gets lost, right?
Yeah.
So using a factory allows you to say, look, let me do the setup somewhere else, so that anybody who comes in to read this test or to update it, right, they don't have to spend 3 weeks figuring it out. They know what the test is about, because that's all the code that's in there. So we find that really helpful.
I don't know how many orgs you've worked with that have hit their maximum number of characters of code.
Some.
I have worked with quite a few of them. And hey, gee, we got back thousands, tens of thousands of lines by consolidating some of the tests. Because, or not lines, but characters. Because, everybody, you get 15 different tests that are all creating an account. Okay?
Yeah.
That's anywhere from 5 to 25 lines, depending upon the number of fields you have to have in there. So it just adds up really quick.
Yeah, when I started working at Mitsubishi back in March of 2017, we had used like somewhere around 30 or 33% of our Apex, our available characters, or whatever you want to refer to it as. And we're closing in on close to 55% or so at this point. Bye, Manisha. Thank you for attending.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a great night.
Thanks.
Yeah, so it definitely starts to add up, especially when people aren't reusing the utility classes that are there. It adds up, and it adds up quite quickly.
Yeah.
Do you, with the test factory, or regularly or rarely, like how often, maybe never, hit a thing where, okay, you want to create, because we have a couple of different record types in account. So we have a couple different kinds of accounts that we have to create for our tests. And for some of our tests, we want the same record type account, but created a little differently. Do you just add different methods in your test factory for the different flavors of the same record type? Or
I have found that gets out of hand, because then you end up
Yeah.
with 18 versions of create account. What
Right.
we do is in all our test factory methods, we have a parameter, Boolean parameter called insert, right? Or insert data. And so when you ask the factory for something, you tell it whether or not you want it to insert it and give it back to you or not. So if I have a generic pattern for an account, but I need to do some things locally to it, like change the record type or do something else in my test, then I'll ask the factory for it, but say, don't insert it. I'll do that. Just grab me a skeleton and give it back to me, and then I'll complete it and insert it as a part of my test.
I'll give you back the object so you can manipulate it a little bit, and
Right.
locally.
But if I don't care, if it's just give me a
Yeah.
generic account, I don't want to have to do the DML. Let the factory do that. So we have a parameter that lets us determine based on whether there's more to do to the object for custom situations or not, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
How do you handle that parameter, Eric? Is it a custom setting, custom metadata? Is it built into the new test class you're writing?
No, this is just for the factory itself, right? So when I'm designing a test, I know whether in that test I need to, massage an object. So in the test factory class, all of our methods, right? Get account, get contact, create, task, whatever it is, whatever these methods are that I'm doing for setup in the test. When I ask for them, I say, and before you give it back to me, insert it into the database, because I need there to be an ID.
You're passing the bool, the true false Boolean in the signature of the method that you're calling from the test utility class.
Yeah, in the factory, those methods allow flags for me to determine when I call it from the test, right? I say, get me an account and I want you to insert it, or I don't.
That's interesting. I've always, I know that you can do testing without actually inserting records.
Mm-hmm.
Since Kevin, who I referenced earlier, explained that I don't need to insert everything, I still don't really have a full grasp on how you can run a test without inserting it. I know nothing actually gets inserted when you run tests. Everything is rolled back, but it's never the full connection to that has never really clicked in my brain. So I always insert when I'm doing tests because I know everything's going to get rolled back.
Yeah, I think the distinction there is things do get inserted during tests, but they don't get committed to the database, right? So for the purposes of working during and following the test, when you're doing assertions, that data is really there. But at the database transactional layer, they're going to roll it back before it gets committed. So it's locally available, but then goes away after.
So what? How does? So basically, without inserting it, it's locally available. What? Why do you? Okay. So if I'd rewritten this the test class to not insert, totally remove this line 15 and 28. How? I guess you know what? Shits and giggles. Okay, I just recorded that and I'm going to post that publicly. That's the wrong key. Let's see what happens. I really don't understand. I guess I understand. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, so I want to be clear. I'm not inserting it, right? I'm either saying, get me an account, and in the case how we write it, if it's true, if I want you to insert it, then it's going to create the account, do all the things, call the insert, and then return me the response, right?
Right,
In other
from the
cases,
utility class so
right.
that you can manipulate it. But
in other cases, I'm going to say, get me an account and pass in false. I don't want you to insert it. I want you to create it and then give it back to me. And I'm going to make some finishing touches and then insert it myself. So I'm not saying that the record doesn't get inserted. Either you want the factory to do the insertion for you, or you want to do that in your test because of your own needs for that test. That makes sense?
okay, that makes complete sense. And I personally got that from the first time you said it.
Okay.
But what I just did was I commented out the inserts on this test class and I ran it again. And you can see here that it was successful without inserting those records, even though they were test setup data. But the difference seems to be this unread thing here, but the test was successful.
Show me the test itself.
The test is just one test.
Uh-huh.
And
well, yeah. So I think that might be a little bit misleading. That test is successful because there are no assertion statements in it. System.assert.
Right. Yeah,
so
I left those. They should be there, but I left them out because of
but I'm saying
my
every
time
test,
crunch.
Every test, if you have no assertions, every test is successful unless there's an exception, unless it actually blows up.
Oh.
Right. So the developer console will say the test was successful because it didn't fail.
Oh.
Right. Good point.
Yeah. So it will look like it's successful, but really you didn't test it at all. Right.
So I always want to actually insert.
The code is covered by the test, but it's not verified by an assertion. The results aren't.
Right.
I know the assertion isn't, but I'm wondering. So I'm wondering. System dot. I know we're going over here, and I appreciate that y'all are staying on with me. I think we've got some good information going on. And I do have some links for Dreamforce to share with everybody, but I kind of would like to try this if y'all are cool with that.
I think just one more comment, Melissa. The other reason that it's succeeding is because you didn't insert the record. You commented out line 28. It means that the leads list in line 35 is empty. So when you go through your for loop, your whole for loop gets skipped.
Oh, that makes sense because when you do test setup, you actually have to query for it. So, okay, that makes sense. No need to take.
So I'm only saying these things so that we're not confused by why it was successful. It was successful because the meat of the test didn't run in that case.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes complete sense. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, sure.
It's the little things that you learn while you're talking to other devs that really help you get your brain around things. So hopefully that was a great point. I didn't know. Okay, so we got a comment coming in. Usama, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Great point. I didn't know that. I don't know what HY means. I am new to Salesforce. I have a quick question for Dreamforce. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to stop recording right now so that when I post this to the chatter group, it only talks about the sets conversation, because the Dreamforce conversation is really only relative to those that are going and only relative for the next 20 days. So recording is stopping.